afternoon. We're so glad to have you today. My name is Cassie Finley, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar on effective communication within your organization. This is one of the skills that is taught through our 360 High Performance Leadership Mastermind Groups. Our presenter today is Jeff Morris. He's president of the Mosconi Group, and Jeff is a serial entrepreneur and has worked for a variety of consumer goods as well as business-to-business companies and not-for-profit organizations to help build internal employee productivity, change behaviors, and achieve measurable results for organizations interested in creating a sustainable, customer-focused organization. He's currently working on his latest book, Story Selling: How to Close More Sales in a World Adverse to Sales. So please help me welcome Jeff Morris.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It's great to see you all online today, and thanks for taking time to sit in with us this afternoon. Just so you know, we're scheduled for an hour, but we won't use all of it. And also, please feel free to use the messaging function on your screen to ask questions along the way. We'll save those toward the end and kind of address all of them at once. But and also, if you haven't already, you can download, there's what's called the Communication Skills Assessment from your webinar link. You should be able to download it. If you can't figure out how to download it, just email it to me. Just email me and I'll send it to you. But basically, it's a great tool for you to kind of evaluate your own personal communications effectiveness currently, how you are currently. You can also have your leadership team fill one out for themselves. It's not necessarily for sharing your answers. It's really just to kind of assess your own strengths and weaknesses and look for areas where maybe you could improve communications, your effectiveness as a communicator. So first, let's take a look at our agenda, what we're going to be talking about. First, we're going to talk about, why communications has changed, and most of you could probably figure this out. I mean, the world has changed. A lot of technology added to our lives and those kinds of things. Then we'll boil communication down to its basics so that we can kind of begin to understand the whys and the hows of effective communications. Then we'll talk a little bit about the barriers to effective communications. And finally, I'll share some tips on kind of how to effectively communicate really from both sides of a conversation, if you will. So what is communication? Why has it changed? Communication's changed. I mean, much of this has to do with the technology and how we use technology, right? We rely heavily on email and text messages now rather than, the face-to-face. 10 years ago, it would have been unheard of, for an employee to check their email in a business meeting. Now it occurs at kind of an alarming frequency. And why is this? Because of this fundamental shift in our lifestyles, the balance of our life and work, where we work, how we learn, even in the way we buy products and services. We no longer learn about products from a single advertising source like we used to. We learn about it from everywhere, right? From our neighbors, from social media, from advertising, from a wide variety of places. The internet has really changed the dynamics and the way we communicate. In the 80s, we used phones, then cell phones became more prevalent, and now it's far more common for someone to send an email or a text message through their phone than even to place a call. Now we're literally never without our phones for most of our lives, which also often includes our email, and more addictively, those social media apps, if you will, the Facebooks and the LinkedIn kind of things that we're always looking at. We live in a multi-screen culture, really, between computers and e-readers and tablets, smartphones, and really kind of the good old-fashioned television. Every person utilizes an average of 2.4 screens every day for several hours. You can see the television, and the smartphone, and the computer. So we're utilizing screens on a fairly regular basis. In fact, every one of you today alone will experience roughly 25,000 different digital experiences. Whether it's through your phone, text messages, the pump topper at the gas station that has a digital message on it, everything. So I'm pretty sure that my teenage daughter has effectively tripled that number every day, but but for most of us, it's about 25,000 different digital experiences. You probably woke up to your cell phone, you get text throughout the day, you read your news online, you email from your desk, those sorts of things. It's really had a profound effect on the channels of communication, but not necessarily the mechanism of communication. So I know this chart there's a lot going on here. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but it's good to understand what we're each doing internally in our brain as we communicate. The elements of communication are really the same. There's a message, there's a sender, there's a receiver or a listener. There's the channel that the message comes through, whether it's a vocal channel or whether it's email or text or a variety of different ways. There's feedback from the listener to the speaker, if you will. There's the environment. There's interruptions and those kinds of things that could be happening around us. And then there's what we call noise or filters, and those are really kind of established based on our own personal paradigms. I'll talk a little bit about that here in a minute, but basically there's still just two basic phases of the communication process. The transmission phase. The information is sent from one individual or a group, the sender, to another individual or group, the receiver. And then the second one is the feedback phase, where really the common understanding is assured. So we know that we have a common understanding. To begin the transmission phase, really the sender decides on the message, and then what happens is that you mentally translate that message into visuals or language. This is called encoding. So you encode what you're about to say, and much of that intent can be nonverbal. So this includes all messages encoded without using written or spoken language, facial expressions, body language, even the style of dress. In fact, physical elements such as buildings and office furniture and space can convey messages. You may even realize that office arrangements convey status, power, prestige, those kinds of things. This is, you see this a lot with law firms, for example, and the types of accoutrements that they might have in a law firm. So if you're interested in becoming a more effective communicator, it's important to pay close attention to your nonverbal behaviors while communicating. So that's kind of an interesting thing to start to notice about yourself and start to learn how to control. But you can learn to coordinate your verbal messages with your nonverbal behavior, and really to be sensitive to what your employees, managers, your peers are saying nonverbally as well. It's easy to understand, to kind of underestimate the powerful impact that nonverbal communication has on the perceptions of others. We have what we call our mastermind groups, and we delve into kind of some more in-depth techniques to help you understand nonverbal messages and how to identify them among your employees. But a nonverbal message can really undermine verbal or written messages. A message can often really only be given proper meaning in context. And cues or signals are really easy to misinterpret, to interpret without some of those nonverbal cues. But anyway, back to, once encoded, we really decide on the best way to convey this message or the channel that we're going to use, and maybe a phone call, an email, a letter. We may go see them face to face. Of course, all of these actions happen really in a matter of seconds. It's not like we're, mentally encoding and then decoding, and, this is all happening in microseconds in our brain. Now, there are some folks out there who are, they like to think about things, so it takes them a little bit longer to decode. So, if you're someone who decodes very quickly, you may kind of get frustrated by you're waiting for them to kind of give you a response or give you feedback, but that's because they're taking a little bit more time than you might take to decode. So, but just as quickly, the feedback phase is really initiated. So that second phase is initiated by the receiver, who now becomes the new sender, right? The receiver now decodes that message, usually filtering it through their own paradigm, right? That paradigm really can include dozens of things. It can include their feelings about the sender, maybe their health, the situation, what's going on around them. Perception really plays a central role in communication and affects both transmission and feedback. The encoding and decoding of messages and even the choice of medium really hinge on both of the perceptions of the senders. If it's someone that you don't particularly like, you may opt to send them an email or versus going to see them face to face, for example. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. But by the way, the feedback stage. So that second stage, if you're the list, the feedback stage is where really one of the most important steps of effective communication can occur. And really the first tool that I'll suggest for you on your path to becoming a more effective communicator. An effective communicator literally communicates what they have decoded to make sure that it was correctly interpreted, or to request more information if they haven't correctly interpreted it. So many of us really just kind of skip this step. We don't want to feel stupid for asking a question, or we assume we know what's been stated, versus actually confirming that. That's actually a very powerful tool in becoming an effective communicator. But as an example of just kind of some outside, we talked about technology. This webinar, for example, kind of allows us to conveniently meet, and for me to share some information with you. You don't need to take a lot of time out of your day to do a live event. But more importantly, you can't read my nonverbal cues, and I don't receive feedback from you. Since there's so many of us online, to have all these phone lines open would be kind of a complicated process. But it's convenient, and it does limit our communication somewhat. That's why we kind of prefer our live monthly mastermind groups. But we are also working on some great tools to do some of these groups online and still be able to capture some of those nonverbal communication things. So anyway, sorry, I digress. And so, as I mentioned earlier, once we've encoded, any communication really is made up of the three components that we probably recognize. There's the verbal, or the words that we say. There's the vocal, our voices, intonation, our inflections, the types of things that we do vocally. And, there's visual, your facial expressions, your body language, those kinds of things. I'm not sure if any of you know the percentages. Some of you may, having, maybe you've kind of seen some of these things, but really, verbal is only 7% of our communication. So the words that we're saying are literally only 7% of what you're retaining. The words that I am speaking are only about 7% of what you're retaining. Because what people remember is what they experience. So, the vocal inflections and modulations and those visual representations really make up the majority of our experience, especially in a learning setting, when we're trying to learn or we're trying to solve problems in a meeting, those types of things. So, if you're committed to communicating more effectively and powerfully, here's really one most important things you can take away from today, and the second tool I'm providing to you. You cannot control what comes out of any person's mouth, right? We wish we could, but we can't. The only thing that we can control is our paradigm, or what I've been referring to as our filter. This is how we see the world, how we mentally filter the incoming message. For example, if we kind of hold on to the attitude that the person that is speaking is wrong, or if they're somehow less of a person than we are, we're a bigger person or we're a better person, it really will affect our response and how the person we're communicating with receives the words, the verbal part of what we're saying. It'll show in our body language, in the words that we select, and other things. Really, these cues can easily erode the trust of the person that we're communicating with. If you're a leader and you eventually want to become a leader, you want this trust that you obtain from others is really one of the biggest tools in your arsenal. And trust can be really the biggest obstacle to any effective communication with this person or this group, if you're speaking to a group, in the future. So, this is when I hear someone say, I can't believe the divorce rate in this country is so high, I really say, I can't believe it's so low. I mean, we're an educated country. That education creates individualism that's really defined by our paradigm, and our culture encourages that individualism. So we know that we're all right, correct? That paradigm creates this internal noise and blocks effective communication. Last summer, I bought my teenage daughter a T-shirt that says, don't you know that don't you think if I wasn't right, I would know it, because she's just kind of one of those people that knows everything. One of my early mentors, the day I met him in his office, the very first day, he opened his desk drawer and turned around to the table that we were sitting at. He had pulled out a business card. And, I'm shuffling around looking for my business card, but he handed me this card. It had one line on it. It was just a white business card with one line. He told me to carry it with me always and refer to it any time that I was faced with a difficult decision, challenging client, and challenging employee. And really, the card simply said, they might be right. And I still carry this card today because really what this did was it allowed me to shift my paradigm, right? It allowed me to shift my filter in the way that and believe me, I am not perfect at this at all. It's a kind of constant practice for me. So as you work on shifting your own paradigm and the way to become more effective communicator, there really are barriers that you'll kind of come across. And the first and probably most damaging barrier is assumption, right? So for most people, our conversations are really like two monologues. I talk, you talk, and we walk away. We both assume that we got it. I encourage you to never assume anything. Some of the most popular assumptions are the ones we don't even know that we're doing. For example, we assume that we're going to understand each other, right? I talk, you talk, we walk away assuming that we know what the other one said. So everyone has his or her own paradigm. So it's never really safe to assume that we've all just been understood. That's why I mentioned, confirming what you heard has been decoded correctly is a very powerful tool. We've all experienced it at one time or another. It really can be like as simple as asking someone to file some documents, for example. A few weeks later, you need the files, and so you go to find the files, and you found out that they've been put into totally different folders. They're maybe in a different filing cabinet. You have no idea where to find them. The person who you asked to file them is not there that day. You assume that they knew what you meant, and they clearly did not. It's just because everyone has a different filter, and so it's important to not assume that we understand each other. For supervisors and leaders, another dangerous assumption is that there's knowledge, right? We hire people for their experience and their skills, so they should understand how to do what we need them to do. We do a lot of supervisory training, so we've seen that supervisors and managers make a lot of assumptions. You stand up in a staff meeting, you go, okay, let's get this meeting started. I got a few things to tell you. And then your leaders, they monologue for about 10 minutes, or whatever, 5-10 minutes. And then, they go, okay, everybody get to work, have a good day, make some money, go get them, that kind of thing. So, what are the employees doing? They don't know the goal. They don't know the job. They may be afraid to go ask because they'll look stupid. But the boss, meanwhile, because there's no feedback, assumes that everyone has understood what to do and what not to do. We often see this when we help companies understand their mission and vision. Every company assumes that every employee understands the mission and vision. We've had meetings, right? We have plaques on the wall. Everybody sees it. They read it every day. They walk by it every day. Never assume that your employee or coworkers understand the vision and mission of your company. I can go talk to 10 different people in your company. I'll get 10 different answers. Even if you have it printed on the wall, maybe you gave them cards to carry in their pocket. Even if they do all of those things, they may actually define those values differently than what you had originally intended. For example, one of our values is exceptional customer experience, right? We've had employees interpret that as meaning if the client has a problem, we go out of our way to make it better. That's really customer service. That's not customer experience, right? Even though it states in multiple places on our website, on the walls of our offices, in the job descriptions, the customer experience means that we go out of our way to make sure that the entire experience of doing business with us is as effortless as possible. even before they are a client. These are two different ideas interpreted through very different filters. So, there are several mastermind group techniques that we employ to kind of to help you go back to your company and help you entrench those values and missions, communicate those to your employees effectively. We won't get into them today or in the interest of time. We have some other things that we need to cover here. So, but there are also, a lot of other assumptions we often hold. For example, what we believe people feel about us or what we feel about them. Sometimes we assume someone doesn't like us or does like us. That may be true or may not. However, these can inhibit us. And here's an example. Several years ago, I worked for a company. They had just hired two new people, young people, a couple years out of school. They both had worked in our industry for the past 2 years, so they both had kind of the same level of real life experience. Then through the rumor mill, it was discovered that one of them had a Harvard education and the other attended community college. The company did what most companies would do, right? We gave more weight as a management team, we gave more weight to the ideas of our Ivy League employee, right? However, that perception actually caused our company to overlook an exceptional idea that was provided by our community college graduate. He had faced a very similar situation in their previous employment a year or so before and had implemented a unique and successful solution. It worked. And so he had suggested that we implement something similar, but it didn't happen because the perception was that the Ivy League employee was somehow a better solution. Now, this story has a happy ending. I've stayed friends with our community college graduate. I saw him go on to found his own company using the idea that he had actually suggested to the company. That company is no longer in business that we work for, but he recently sold his company for $22 million. So this is a dramatic example, obviously, but the point is we have to avoid assumptions to become a successful communicator. So another barrier, technology. So, is this a barrier or is it a good thing? Really, it can be an obstacle or it can create efficiency, depending on how it's used. Like I told you earlier, we'll all experience about 25,000 different digital experiences. We love technology. Right now, if you got a text, you would know it instinctively. It literally draws your attention for a split second, no matter what you're doing, even if you don't check it. You should have your phone off, but we somehow just never remember to do it, right? In fact, you guys all have your phones off for this webinar, right? I'm sure you all do. But that's why we like webinars, because we can learn a little something, but still multitask, right? So what are the pros of technologies? Well, it's instant. We have an instant communication. It's convenient. It's transparent. It's efficient. You don't have to have the 5 minutes of niceties that a phone call requires. You can simply text. It provides a record of what was said. Most importantly, technology really breaks down barriers and brings together a diversity of people. We communicate with people we may not have had the opportunity to communicate with through social media, online messaging, other technologies. One of our clients has offices in China, Mexico, and Brazil. We never would have been able to do business the way that we currently do it prior to this technology age. So what are the cons? The biggest is the loss of human contact. Feelings don't get accurately conveyed. We've all done it, right? We made a point via email. We used all caps. We used a lot of exclamation points. My favorite was a former boss who set every email he sent with a high priority, so it had that little red exclamation mark next to it. So what does that do? It's like crying wolf. Eventually people ignore it. All this accomplishes is putting your employees on the defensive. Nothing really gets solved. Because remember, over 90% of the communication happens through nonverbal means. A text or email can only convey 7% of our communication intent, which means that it creates assumptions. With text or emails, you're only getting 7% of that meaning across. And if you're a manager or a leader, I can tell you right now, in the absence of nonverbal indicators, your employees will automatically fill in the blanks, and they will assume the worst. They'll assume a tone for the words that they are reading. Oh, I think he's angry because of the way that he typed this, or I think that she's not happy with the way this is going because it was a short email versus a long email. it won't be positive, no matter how many happy emoticons you may use, smiley faces or whatever. They tend to fill in the blanks for that. So, and finally, another one of the con is really one of our pros, transparency. Communicating via technology really demonstrates transparency and helps to build trust, but it also creates a permanence. We all warn our teenagers of this regularly, as often as they're online. So here are the rules that we encourage our clients to follow. When you're using technology, only use it for transactional information or for good news. Don't use it for complicated thoughts or bad news. If you want to communicate a new policy for your company, do it face-to-face. Or if you want to confront someone, do it face-to-face. If you just want to convey your whereabouts or the time of a meeting or even congratulate someone, go ahead and use that technology. However, we often encourage leaders, especially leaders, to give those congrats in person. It holds far more meaning. But technology has become ubiquitous, right? Right now, I'm more disconnected than all of you probably, but once this is done, what am I going to do? Check my messages, right? I'm not saving lives. I'm not putting a man on the moon. Most of us aren't. But technology is everywhere, and it's become a part of the way that we communicate. But there are other barriers to kind of always be considering: how you're filtering conversations through your attitudes, your perceptions. Are you bored? Is the language too simplified? What are the nonverbal things that are happening? Interruptions, hot buttons. You may even be sick that day. So just try to remember as you listen, they may be right. So let's start on that side of the conversation, listening. To effectively communicate, first you have to understand your audience. Understanding your audience requires active listening. In our mastermind groups, you get a whole arsenal of communication techniques. In the interest of time, we're going to give you some of the more effective and kind of simple methods that you can try within your organization, really starting today, if you like. So how many of you go in on Monday morning and ask someone else how their weekend went? We've all done it, right? But how many of you remember how their weekend went? By lunchtime, you've probably forgotten you've even had the conversation. For most of us, we've forgotten 5 minutes later because we check out. We feel we're not going to get anything important from this conversation. We make that judgment immediately about an employee's weekend. So we kind of are doing other things in our head, or maybe physically doing other things, typing on a computer or as they talk. We always write it off to the idea that we're multitasking. We're half listening about their son's soccer game while we're going through our to-do list in our head. Or maybe even, like I said, continuing to type up a report on our computer, watching our screen rather than their face. But remember that over 90% of our communication skills are nonverbal, so we know when someone's only half listening. You know it, right? When someone's only kind of half listening to you, you can read the body language and the facial expressions. So what happens to the speaker? They know that you're not listening, and your question about the weekend is not genuine. This begins to erode trust. Trust is one of those kind of really important leadership advantages that you can obtain, yet it's one of the hardest ones to secure. By listening, you build trust, and it's a very simple activity. It's well worth listening actively. So here's two simple techniques to ensure that you're listening. Okay. Like I said, there are many other techniques, but these are two really simple ones. The first one is eye contact. This is really the most important part. Don't be checking your phone, and don't eye dart. This is where you're kind of easily distracted. You're always kind of looking over someone's shoulder real quickly before returning back to them. I'm still guilty of this from time to time. Something colorful catches your eye, or someone enters that coffee shop that you think you may know, so your eyes jump over to the door for a second. But always try to maintain eye contact. By the way, when you're speaking to someone, you do have to break eye contact every once in a while, so they don't begin to feel uncomfortable. Why is this guy staring at me? Do I have something on my face? For example, I might look toward the ceiling for a moment, as if I'm thinking through a problem, and then return to making eye contact. This break actually gives them a little chance to breathe, or to eye dart herself, right? If you're speaking to a group, you really shouldn't spend more than 3 to 5 seconds on any one person. They also start to feel uncomfortable, so share the wealth, share the eye contact. When you're listening, however, always maintain eye contact. Make sure that you're always connected. The second is feedback. As part of active listening, give your speaker feedback. This really demonstrates that you're engaged in what they're saying. So here's my little trick to remember, to kind of remembering to provide feedback. Every once in a while, say some variation of these words. That's interesting. Tell me more. Your daughter hit a single and a double? Wow. Then what happened? Tell me more. This is also the key to kind of staying engaged, just continually giving feedback. Remember that really the moment your mouth shuts, your brain goes somewhere else. I mean, that's how we're wired. You immediately start going through your to-do list, what you have, people you have to call, that kind of thing. By the way, for some reason, this can be harder for the male of our species than the female. Not trying to be sexist, but it doesn't mean it's only men, far from it. But women tend to adopt this technique more naturally. For guys listening in today, here's my challenge to you. Over the next week, make that effort to use that statement in conversations with your spouse. That's interesting. Tell me more. You'll be amazed how things will change around your house, right? So there are some methods for successfully extracting yourself from those less than useful conversations, but again, the interest of time, I won't go into that today. But so instead, just kind of keep this overall thought in mind always. You're getting something from every conversation. In most conversations, 99% of them, you'll be getting feedback about your company or ideas about how to manage your customers, important business things. But even if it's that conversation about an employee's weekend, you'll end up with that person's trust. It makes it worthwhile to spend the time listening. So now let's switch to an important communication attribute and tip for successful leadership, right? And this is employee feedback. A minute ago, I mentioned feedback in the context of ongoing conversation, to demonstrate that you're listening actively. That's conversational feedback, right? That's ongoing. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about leadership feedback, or information provided to another person to help them grow and improve. This is what helps grow your company. It helps create a culture of effective communication. So here are a couple of tips for you to try at home. First one is to make sure the feedback is given in a formal or semi-formal setting. Don't just drop in and say, "Hey, you got a minute?" You kind of want to give them the impression that we need to talk, and so I need you to actively listen versus just kind of tuning it out, right? I prefer semi-formal. This is what I do. I literally prepare for the conversation by jotting down an agenda. I do this by hand on a scrap of paper or something, or a napkin or whatever. Excuse me. It's not a formal published, agenda, but it conveys the idea that I have something important to navigate through with them. I go into their office and I sit down with my handwritten agenda. Then I simply say, "Hey, I got a couple things I'd like to go over with you." The semi-formal agenda tells them that this is more than a conversation about my weekend. So don't tune me out. I need you to listen actively. But there are some guidelines to make sure that this feedback is most effective, right? The first is, be specific. It can't be vague. For example, I might say to an employee, "Hey, I noticed you've been coming in late. Our policy is that we start at 8:30. Okay, that's very specific, right? Secondly, it must focus on behavior, not the person. So instead of saying, "I noticed you've been coming in late. Our policy is we start at 8:30. That's frustrating. I'm not sure what your problem is. Maybe you're just lazy," something along those lines. You really should reform your statement into what we call I statements. This type of statement tells them how you feel about the situation. It keeps it more on an objective level, less on a subjective level. So it might be, the conversation might be, "I've noticed you've been coming in late. Our policy is that we start at 8:30. I feel that we're not important to you," and it kind of really slows us all down. So when you say that you feel unimportant to someone, or they've made their coworkers feel unimportant, they take notice, because that was never their intention. You've reframed their behavior by conveying how that behavior affects others around them. The next thing is it should be appropriate for this situation. There's no need to pull up a mistake they made in the past. Keep it all about the behavior you're trying to change right now. Let the past stay in the past, if you will. Make it actionable. what can they change immediately, today or tomorrow. I've noticed you've been coming in late. Our policy is we start at 8:30. I feel we're not important to you. Kind of slow this down. So I need you to be sure you're in by 8:30, right? And then finally, your feedback should be clear. And this is what we talked about at the beginning. Without being condescending, ask them to repeat it back to you. For example, you can ask, does this all make sense? Can you restate what we talked about just so that I know that we're on the same page? Those kinds of questions they're not condescending. It's just like, hey, I just want to check in here. Here's another example. Instead of saying, I don't feel like you're putting in enough effort, for example, you might say, when you're late 3 weeks in a row filling in your budget reports, it gives me a sense that you don't have enough time invested into our accounting procedures. Can you let me know why you've been late and how we might help you get back on track with these reports? So just kind of making it more about me, it gives me a feeling of that really kind of refocuses the behavior. It's not about them personally. Most of us simply just don't give feedback because we just really assume that the employee knows that they did wrong. But really that's not a safe assumption. And by the way, don't forget to give positive feedback too. Man, as leaders, we really fall down here. Praise and recognition make employees feel important, which motivates them further. Take your team out to lunch to celebrate a sales milestone, get key employee gift certificates to say thanks for a job well done, or just tell them, hey, you did a great job on that presentation. Good work, good job. Here's our simple tip. We use Sweet Success, which is a not-for-profit enterprise with connections to success. We joined their Cookie of the Month club, so we're supporting a great cause, and they deliver these amazing cookie platters. These platters sit on our exceptional employees' desks all day long, and others come by and sample it, and they get to see what a great job they did and eat an amazing cookie, right? It takes some practice to perfect this feedback model. Our groups pair you with other peers, people who are just like you, other managers and leaders, to really kind of practice this in a monthly group and hold each other accountable to following through on this feedback model and sharing experiences, those kinds of things. So we focused on two, and arguably the most important components, if you would, of effective communication: active listening and providing good feedback. But here are a few kind of other tips that you can use to develop a culture of communication within your organization. Trust your people and help them trust you. I'm assuming that none of us have hired a group of complete idiots, right? We've hired people with skill and intelligence to get the job done, so we don't need to micromanage. When employees feel like they have control over their job, they feel a sense of purpose and are really more invested in the entire process. And amazingly, when you demonstrate that you trust your employees, they begin to trust you. You can build upon this trust by asking about their lives and listening actively. Those types of little tactics really can kind of help build on that trust. There is no employee, by the way, who honestly thinks that you're going to spend a bunch of money addressing his or her individual problem. They just want to be acknowledged and understood. So when I have an employee who comes to me and says, my computer's so slow, I need, the new XJ1, with turbocharge or whatever, if we don't have it in the budget, then, I listen very carefully, and I don't ignore it. I use it to kind of help build trust. I challenge them to identify a solution. We don't have it in our budget. Is there somewhere else that we could cut budget to make this happen? Or I simply say, sometimes you kind of have to just say, I certainly understand and I appreciate how you feel, right? Now, when I say that, I'm not agreeing with them, right? I'm not going to change anything. I'm just simply expressing my understanding. People really want to be acknowledged and understood. Then they feel respected. They feel like you've actually listened to them. Take emotions out of the equation. Sometimes work discussions can turn into personal attacks. When an employee is, kind of starting to get under your skin, take your emotions out of the equation. Take a deep breath, count to 10, whatever works for you, and then respond in a calm, unemotional way, which really kind of brings us to our next tip, which is, to focus on the behaviors and not the personalities. When you do respond, don't make it personal. For example, instead of saying you did a terrible job putting together that presentation, try, here's a few points I think you need to work on that could really add to what you've already written. Or, I'm having some trouble understanding what you're trying to get across in this presentation. Can you explain it to me? Also make sure that the person on the receiving end isn't taking your comments the wrong way. Ask for that clarification at the end of the conversation. Make sure you're both on the same page. For example, you might say, how do you feel about the issues that we just discussed, or something along those lines. Manage individuals, not groups. Your feedback must be directed at individuals. By identifying a team instead of an individual, there's a lack of specificity that enables everyone to avoid personal responsibility. Since everyone feels that their own effort met expectations, right? It couldn't have been me. So as a consequence, the behavior really doesn't change, and everyone feels criticized. Group communications are perfect for providing general information, education, praise, but they should not be used for individual direction or criticism. Remember, praise in public and criticize in private. We've all heard that before. Assign tasks directly and clearly. People work best when they know what's expected of them. Good managers identify the goals and measures in simple, understandable terms, assign responsibility unequivocally, and confirm that the information is understood by those to whom it's directed. Good managers follow up, give corrective input, ensure each of their subordinates is on the same page and working toward the same objective. Managers should always remember that no employee takes a job with the expectation that they'll be overlooked or ignored or insignificant. Employees want to be liked and respected by their peers and proud of their employer. Management's challenge, of course, is to maintain and kind of further develop this employee enthusiasm and commitment, even during times of stress. And remember, mistakes are part of growing. Falling short and correcting the course are regular occurrences in business and in life. So dealing with subordinates the way you wish to be dealt with in a similar situation really is the best course any manager could take. So I certainly hope you've enjoyed our communication today and gotten a couple of ideas you can implement yourself. Thank you for joining us. Email me if you have any questions or if you need a copy of that communication skills assessment to pass out at your office.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciated that. We do have a few questions. Do you have time to answer those?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, great. One of the questions is, you mentioned that you teach tactics on nonverbal communication. Can you give some examples of that?
Okay, so there's a lot of them, but some of the techniques that we teach are real simple ones, like pay attention. Become acutely aware of your body and your facial expressions. We had a client whose facial expressions she felt made her seem angry when she was just concentrating on what was being said. So she began keeping a mirror on her desk so she could see herself. And it wasn't a vanity thing. She just wanted to, she wanted to pay attention to what she was doing with her facial expressions. Another tactic is just to ask, how do I come across to you? Am I too animated? Am I too serious? We had another client who had a salesperson who struggled once they were kind of face to face with a prospect. He finally started asking customers the customers he already had, and would say, hey, when we first met, what'd you think of me? And they just told him. They said, hey, I thought you had a sour disposition. Maybe it was your facial expressions or something. And so he realized that he was coming across as someone who was just not a nice person just because of his facial expressions. Another is to listen to yourself, listen to your voicemail. Do a sample presentation and videotape it. Watch your body language. Listen to your voice, what your voice is doing. Some of our mastermind group members have joined Toastmasters. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but it's supposedly I've never done it, but it's a great organization. They say it really kind of helps you get outside your head and kind of look at the way that you present yourself. So these are the types of things that we practice as a group, for example, not at every meeting, but occasionally.
Great, thanks. Now, you've mentioned mastermind a couple of times, and I know it was part of your introduction. Can you tell me more about what this means and how are these groups being put together?
Okay, so they're made up of leaders or prospective leaders, people who want to become leaders and want to learn really from what we call an adult learning model, right? So they want to learn by sharing experiences with their peers, implementing tactics that they've learned, and then being held accountable to this by the group, to the things that they learned the month before and they were supposed to implement. And your group helps you kind of hold your feet to the fire, if you will. And really, that's one of the reasons that when we learn something new as adults, the learning fails, because we don't use it in practice and we don't have anyone holding our feet to the fire. There's no accountability. The mastermind groups give you, several people, usually 7 to 8, who are there to share ideas, bounce ideas off of, share successes, and hold you accountable. Like I said, you learn the principles as a group, then you practice it together. It's low cost, so it's great if you have a couple of people you want to groom for leadership, or if you simply want to learn how to become a better leader to further your own career, right? Many folks have described it as better than their MBA classes because they kind of learn based on real life experiences and situations rather than from a textbook.
I can see where that would be effective too, just having different people in different industries that could see challenges and even provide some kind of outside the box kind of thinking.
Right.
I have one more question, looks like. So do you have any tips on how to engage in conversation with people you maybe really just don't care that much about?
I know it's difficult. I'm a to the point kind of guy, so I tend to grow impatient while I wait for the point of our conversation, and many leaders are that way. But I can tell you that the payoff in building trust can make a difference in the engagement of your employees and their effectiveness in their jobs, because they begin to care, because they know that you care. Psychology Today shows that it's a publication that shows that really there are 4 things that motivate employees. Obviously, there's compensation. They want to be compensated well. They want to bond with others and feel like they belong. They want to make sense of their environment, and they want to defend their accomplishments, right? So compensation aside, the other 3 items can be satisfied by simply having an engaged leadership team. When your team listens, you develop a corporate culture that's based on mutual respect and support. You effectively communicate the company's goals, the employees' responsibilities, but more importantly, they're retaining those things. They're internalizing them better. They feel they're important to the success of the company, and they're not just seen as another cog in the machine. And finally, employees feel recognized and acknowledged when you listen to them, right? But for this to happen, you really have to be open to it, both mentally and physically. Your whole leadership team has to be. If your leadership team may be 1 person, it may be 2, it may be 10. But if you can't be, then don't strike up a conversation at that moment. Set aside time every day, though, to talk to 1 or 2 people. And then, secondly, pay attention. Don't check your phone, don't iDart, those things that we talked about. Focus on the person in front of you. And then, always do that, seek that clarification that we talked about. Remember that line, tell me more. Or if they're concerned about something, you can actually use, so what you're telling me is, we've all used that before.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I know that you've got another webinar that's coming up November the 12th at 2 o'clock Central Time, and the title is Developing High Performance Teams. We're excited about that, and I think there's going to be a number of key topics that you'll be addressing. So if you don't mind, I'd like to take just a second and run through those bullet points. One area that you'll be covering is the art of assembling high-performance teams, which I think all of us would be interested in, and then how a high-performance team differs from a traditional work group. The next one will be the stages that teams go through when they are developing into high-performance teams, and then how to instill accountability into team structures. I think this one is really important. I think you linked that, of course, with some of the mastermind strategies that you just mentioned. Another point you'll be discussing is how to recognize the 3 elements of a high-performance team, and then good meeting management skills to improve productivity as both an employee and a leader. I know that this one is very meaningful. People like to use their time wisely, and having those management skills during a meeting, having an agenda is going to be pretty important. So thank you so much.
That's actually one of the top things that we talk about in the mastermind groups is time management, because we all hate to be sitting in those meetings that are an hour and a half long that could have been 30 minutes, and so we talk about those kinds of things a lot.
Yeah, and I think
Thank
that
you.
links directly to what you were talking about with communication.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
so good to hear from you today. Thank you all for joining us. Have a good
thanks
afternoon.
everyone.